I'm joined by Alice Keown, Leasing Director of Hospitality and Leisure from British Land. Hi Alice, thanks for joining us. And of course Neil Hockin, who's Managing Director of Lunson, Mitchenall. Nice to see you, Neil.
And nice to see you as well.
Thanks for joining us today. We've got lots to talk about. Let's do a deep dive. How has the retail scene changed over the last year in your opinion?
I think from an occupational perspective it's better than it was. There's been a rebalancing of rents and positioning, and we now know what retailers want, and I think a lot of our landlord clients are more accepting of the current position. So transactionally, we're kind of on fire at the moment. It's going really, really well for us. I think every deal is different. You know, the days of being an agent and doing 15 deals with JD Sports that are all kind of the same are behind us, and we have to keep reinventing the wheel for that. From a personal perspective, I enjoy that because it makes it challenging. You know, perhaps from an income perspective for an agent, that makes life slightly tougher as the deals take a bit longer to agree. But overall, I think it's positive. We're definitely seeing a move towards alternative uses as well. Not all of it is that deliverable or that viable, but as rents have come down and this rebalancing has really helped, we're seeing lots of our landlord clients being far more proactive in terms of looking at alternative uses and what do customers really, really want, which probably segues into what you do.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I would say the same. We've had record leasing activity over the last 2 years in our retail portfolio. Really high volumes, which has been fantastic. Yeah, so we're seeing all sorts of new operators coming to our centres, as well as the same traditional retail as well.
I mean, that's fantastic news, isn't it? Because when you read the papers, it's all doom and gloom, death of the high street, etc. So to hear what you two are both saying today is really encouraging. Alice, I'd like to know what can leisure do to a destination that retail can't?
It's a really good question. The leisure that we have in our portfolio represents about 10% of our overall business, including food and beverage. And we see that it really promotes engagement with the end user, the customer. So a great example is at Speak, where about a third of our space now is leisure. And we are seeing people come 8 times more frequently during the year than they did before we put the leisure in.
Really? That's interesting.
They are spending more on retail, so they're spending about 37% more on retail.
So it's the leisure that's drawing them in?
Absolutely.
But they're spending more on retail while they're there?
And they spend 64% more overall than a non-leisure user in a year. So it really does promote frequency, dwell and spend.
Would you agree with that, Neil?
I couldn't agree more, and I think we've been it's been a really interesting 5 years or so for the leisure market. There's been an explosion of new uses. So I think if you go back to the leisure we thought of in the pre-COVID days, it was very cinema, restaurant focused, and there's still a place for that, and there are some great cinema brands as well. We're definitely seeing a greater spread of uses as people try and companies try new concepts. I think some of that is, as wacky as axe throwing and indoor putting in all sorts of different guises, through to the stuff that's very IP based, and I think that's probably the future, kind of a whole part of interactive leisure, the sort of different stuff you can do. We were talking to an operator the other day who got a version of Squid Games, but you do it through...
Squid Games?
Yeah, so you do it through VR. But you can be doing Squid Games one moment, and then you can be doing, a reenactment of Henry V in the next moment, And I think that one of the key things about leisure is it has to adapt and change, and the operators we have at the moment are very much pioneers in that sector, so we're seeing them changing their offer, and if one part of their proposal isn't working, they'll take it out and put something else in, and that's a big sea change. I think something landlords appreciate. There's this great thing about the halo effect. So what is the impact of having more consumers in our centres for longer hours? And leisure is part of that draw now. I think it probably helps that we have this sort of availability of space in the form of old department stores, which are now defunct, and that space is easier to convert to leisure than it has been to build separate boxes before. I think the sector will have some issues. Not all of the operators are going to survive, but at the moment I think we're all on a bit of a crest of a wave.
Sounds very positive. Would you describe the leisure industry as more or less resilient than retail, and if so, why?
I think for most of the assets that we work on, retail will always be the core focus, or a bespoke leisure destination. So we work on the O2, for example, which has now got a factory outlet as well. So that's a really good example of blending where leisure and retail works together. And I think it's an amalgam of the two. At the moment, leisure feels quite resilient, but we haven't seen the proof that all of these companies can actually survive when rent-free periods burn off, when they can't use capital contributions to refit. So I think there's some time to go in that sector, and there will be a consolidation because there's been a massive explosion and one invariably follows the other. I think it's a mixture of the two, and there's a risk sort of hidden in your question about downplaying retail. Retail is still an absolutely core part of the offer, but having something that's different and appeals to a different customer, and you look at how people want to shop and make an experience, particularly in the big locations that we both work on, having an amalgam of the two uses is definitely the right thing to do.
What do you think, Alice?
Yeah, absolutely. We see leisure as an opportunity for us to reduce the retail supply, and that in itself helps us drive value within the retail portfolio.
Do you think leisure is more resilient than retail? Or?
So I agree with Neil. I don't think we know yet. We spend a lot of time at BL working out who out of the leisure operators are the people that we can bank on. There are so many operators in the sector, and it's really important for us to get the right offer in the right location. So a big family entertainment centre is great in a drive-to location where there's lots of free parking, and we've got many of those great assets.
And they take me right back to the 90s. Do you remember that, when they first came over from America?
But they would be no good in a city centre. You have to then play to your strengths in the city centre, and put the right kind of offer that's probably more wet-led, that's got that more axe-throwing element in it.
Have you got any examples of tenants who've been resilient throughout the changes in our high street and shopping centres? Who stands out for you?
So I think for me there are sectors that seem to be more resilient. So QSR is always does well in a recession or a downturn, right? People like getting a quick burger, or these days fried chicken.
Who's really popular? Who's standing out at the moment in terms of QSR operators?
So all of the usual ones like Mackie D's and Burger King will be here to stay, but I'm loving the new generation coming through. We heard today that Popeyes think that they'll get a tenfold growth over the next 10 years, and given the sales that they're doing in our assets, I believe that's possible, absolutely. And they've got a lot of competition in that sector.
Yeah.
There are so many fried chicken coming through.
Wingstop seems to be doing pretty well, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Slims and sides and all the rest.
What about you, Neil? Have you seen any particular examples of tenants who have really shone?
I think from the retail side, there has been a consolidation, and those that truly understand how you blend an online offer and an in-store offer are doing well. So, like everyone, I'm a massive fan of Zara. I mean, none of it fits me, but I'm a massive fan of the concept of Zara. Yeah. So, and I think they're a really good example. I think Primark, with their high street resilience, are really important. And I'm a big fan of Next. I think, under Lord Wolston's tutelage, Next are a really interesting company. I think their success, though, and the fact as an industry we've grown into these mega stores, has put pressure on some of the smaller fashion brands. And I think that is difficult. It's a very competitive market. And it also makes it difficult for new international entrants who look at the UK, particularly in the sort of mid-market sector, as being congested and competitive with a lot of brand loyalty. On the leisure side, I agree on your comment on QSR. I think Popeyes is a great concept. Yeah. Things like Wingstop as well. I think there's some interesting new players in the leisure sector. So we've done a deal with the Cube recently, which is using the IP from the game show. And I think we'll see a lot more companies who follow up on the success of game shows and TV programs, so Peaky Blinders, Experience, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There's also some of the traditional brands are doing really well. Hollywood Bowl seem to be resurgent at the moment, and I saw some stats about how far people will travel to go to Hollywood Bowl, and it was really interesting. I'm a massive fan of Everyman as well.
Yeah.
I think the cinema sector, we all know, has got problems. But I think Everyman fits an interesting gap and it adds a bit of niche. And perhaps one of the things we haven't discussed also on the leisure sector is the impact on residential development. You know, British Land have a lot on that sector at the moment. You know, we're revising a few resi developers, and if you can get a brand like Everyman in that elevates the feel of your location, that can add to the sales prospects on the residential as well. So I think there is a really interesting blurring there. I think in terms of restaurant brands, I've always been a big fan of a botanist. I think it fits a really nice niche between being wet-led and having a good food offer. And again, you know, my kids would drive miles to go to get a hanging kebab, which they can pour their sauce over. So I think there's some really interesting stuff out there. But it's very much cross-sector. It is more polarised, though. I think that those who are trading well, really well. But we will see others falling off a cliff.
What do you think has made those businesses in particular so effective, so successful? What is it about them?
I think it's really hard to put your finger on that. I think some of that is the quality of the brand. A lot of it is the quality of proposition. I think the one thing we never talk about is the quality of the management. So the senior management teams, if you ever get the chance to go to Coruña and see what Zara do, it's amazing. And that is a business that is run exceptionally well. And when you go through their HQ and you get to the end and you find there's a hairdressing salon because they have 40 models on site the whole time doing their photo shoots, you know, it's a business they control every aspect. You know, all of their product gets delivered from Coruña. You know, it's an amazing thing. And again, I've touched on Lord Wolfson already, but I think Next are a really, really well-run business. Yeah. So some of it is the quality of the brand. A lot of it is the quality of the management. And that's where I think, particularly in the sector that we're talking about today, leisure and restaurants, you know, this whole thing about franchising is coming back in, which is good because you get a local partner with a vested interest and a capital interest in the project. But equally, you need to control the franchising really tightly so you don't dilute the value of a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Alice, I'd like to ask you, are there any specific geographic locations that you find particularly promising for leisure development?
Well, we trade nationally from Plymouth up to Inverness, and like I say, for me, it's about how convenient the location is, how easily it's accessed, the parking, all of that. You know, and we deliver between 1,000 and 3,000 free car parking spaces in all of our retail parks, and so. You know, the leisure in Inverness, for example, does really well because it's the only place in the Highlands and Islands that people can go and have a bit of fun.
Yeah. Alice, are there any specific geographic locations that British Land are looking at that want to get a foothold in the market where perhaps they are at the moment? Are you eyeing anywhere?
We're always on the lookout. Our major focus is obviously our Canada Water project, which is a town centre regeneration in Zone 2 of London. And that's a really exciting opportunity, particularly for the leisure sector.
Yeah.
So we're opening a 60,000 square foot leisure centre as part of phase 1, which Southwark will run for us. And that will attract nearly 800,000 visitors a year. So
wow.
It demonstrates how exciting a good leisure offer can be.
Anywhere else in the UK that British Land is thinking, actually, it'd be quite nice to get a foothold in here? Have you got a top 3 location hit list?
Our location strategy is predominantly southeast focused. As you know, we're the biggest retail park owner and developer and operator in the country, and we're looking for more of the same. Absolutely.
Okay, very well answered. Neil, does anywhere stand out for you in terms of geographical location, which may be a hotspot in the future?
I think a lot of the market is still quite London-centric, at least when it's starting off. Yeah, we were lucky enough to have a tour of Canada Water recently, and it's an amazing project. I mean, it's a 20-year project, and it's going to be a whole new quarter for London. And I think areas like that are really, really exciting, where you can look at true mixed-use regeneration, but also mixed-use over a longer term, and getting the key planks in place early on in terms of an ambience and an offer that's going to want people to live there in the future is really important. You know, we did the first deal for Tocker in the O2, for example, but they're now moving out to Birmingham as well. So we're definitely seeing expansion, and I think particularly in the leisure sector, it's quite easy to get focused on the bigger cities and what's happening in Edinburgh, St James and Birmingham and Manchester, but also that is filtering through into smaller towns. So we have a leisure box we're under offering somewhere like Bedford at the moment, and it might not be the most glamorous town in the country, but it also needs to have an evening economy, and that's a great thing for us to put into a smaller shopping centre. I think more so than the retail sector, the leisure sector probably has greater capacity to go across a broader range of centres. So, some of these smaller towns are never going to get a Zara. Topshop have now gone. But they will get something new and exciting, which will keep them interested on both a family and probably for a young adult perspective. So the market is polarised, definitely, and some of the operators will stick to the bigger locations, but it's broad enough to be able to cover lots of different opportunities off.
It has been a struggle, hasn't it, for those second-tier locations, market towns, etc., across the country. I mean, it's hard for them. Because as you say, operators like Zara aren't going to look at places like Banbury, are they?
Yeah. Well, I think those towns need to learn to adapt. And in lots of these locations, what you need is the local authority to be really vested in their town or city centre. And that's in terms of both a planning policy, in terms of access to finance, which is obviously one of the issues, but also having an overarching view on what they want their town or city centre to deliver and how they're going to help the landlords procure that for them.
Talking of landlords, what can landlords do to make leasing easier for leisure operators who often have higher capex requirements than their retail counterparts? I'll start with Neil here.
Well, they should obviously start by paying their agents bigger fees. That's always a good start.
Of course,
for anywhere, in my view. I mean, I think outside of that, most of our landlords are quite scientific about this now, and they understand the value add it brings. Sometimes it's easy on plan to look at space and go, well, that could be a leisure box, but when you get into the nitty-gritty of what's actually in the building, it's not always that easy. Floor-to-ceiling heights are never quite what you want, or they're a bit too much. A subdivision is very expensive, and fit-out costs are expensive as well. And I think particularly in the leisure sector at a moment where you're frequently dealing with people who don't have a proven track record, there is quite a high degree of risk.
Yeah.
I think we very much look at it, I don't know if you're the same, I'd be intrigued to find out, Alice, about, you're putting an operator in today, but you're creating a blank canvas that might be someone else tomorrow. And again, I think consumers quite like that because they might get bored of axe throwing in 5 years' time and want to do something completely different. So I think we're very much looking at this as a longer term investment in the physical space, and then who is going to animate it in the shorter term.
Alice, how would you answer that from a British land perspective?
Yeah, so we the leisure sector is difficult for us because the operators do require more support to come in. The economics around the deal are not as good for us, and so when we do go into business with our partners in the sector, we have to know that it's going to work, or we have to know that we can repurpose that space going forward. I think it's been made more difficult by sort of council-run leisure, where they have been able to fulfil a larger capital requirement, and so some of the operators just simply expect half of their fit out, the entire of their fit out, and we simply don't transact in that way. Does
that make things difficult for you in terms of getting the operators?
It does, absolutely. But actually, when the location is right and the operator gets excited about the location and about the quality of the end consumer, then actually that transaction does work for both of us.
Finally, guys, I'd like to know, how can the leisure sector respond positively to the cost of living crisis and other post-COVID challenges, such as changing working patterns?
Well, the sector that we haven't discussed yet is the gym sector and the wellness sector, and I think they are really well positioned. We've got some really great operators in that sector who provide a value proposition that's open 24/7, that allows people the flexibility to come and go as they need to, and that really suits, I think, the modern day lifestyle. And we're seeing many more of those operators seeking out destinations such as retail parks.
And they seem to be tend to be a lot more affordable now than they once were as well, aren't they?
Much more affordable, and it's what people are looking for, particularly the younger generation. They take that part of their life very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is great.
Yeah. Neil, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of the leisure operators, the capex cost is in the infrastructure of the unit, and the challenge for them is having a pricing that allows them to make the asset really work hard for them.
Yeah.
So can they have daytime use during school holidays at a different price to what happens in the evening, and can they adapt their offer to suit both? So if you're doing 10-pin bowling, can you have fun bowling for kids and families up to 6 o'clock, and then can you turn the disco lights on and have a bar and a proper food offer? And the same would apply to cinemas as well. I think like all sectors though, what will pan out over time is there will be like a segmentation of pricing. So gyms are a really good example. You can go and join David Lloyd and it'll cost you an awful lot, or you can go and join a 24-hour gym but isn't David Lloyd and it'll cost you a lot less. It depends on what your budget is. And I think the leisure sector will adapt to that as well, because they'll want to exploit as much of the local economy as they possibly can. And with the advent of all of this new leisure space, it will become competitive. Cinemas are still knocking around, and still, I think Barbie and other recent releases prove that there's a market still.
All hell Barbie, right?
Yeah, all hell Barbie. I fell asleep during Barbie, unfortunately, but I think that has proven that cinemas are still there, and there's a finite amount of spend people will put into their leisure offer, so they're going to have to be competitive, but also make a compelling offer that changes on a regular basis to attract consumers in.
Yeah. Guys, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us today,
Thank you, Lisa.
and have a great show.